Hey everyone, just a real quick announcement. If you're listening to this on the Wednesday when the episodes come out, today's the last day to sign up for the Creative Visionary Program, our 12-week art transformation program. So if you're at all curious, head on over to artlifecvp.com. That's artlifecvp.com, and you can find out all about it. Enrollment deadline is tonight, Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. Hope you can join us. Okay, let's dive into the episode.
I need to be discovering something new, which usually comes from making what some might think was a mistake or doing something unintentionally. And then you have to kind of deal with it. That's where the interesting stuff happens. Doing something I haven't done before.
All right, so you guys, super excited. Thanks again for being here. Today, I get to talk to Philip Buhler. He's an artist that I've watched for a long time, mostly in Julie Nestor's gallery, as a gallery I'm in. So it's cool to see someone's work and then finally get to meet them. So Philip is based in New York right now. And as I said, he's a figurative painter, large paintings, amazing surfaces, and we'll dive all into it. Before you listen, you guys, hop on over to the Art to Life site and click on the podcast episodes, and you can see some of his work, because it's kind of one of those things that I think would be helpful for you to see what he's doing with his work. It's really amazing. Welcome to Art to Life, a podcast for the creatively curious. My name is Nicholas Wilton, and each week I'll help you rediscover not just the art of your life, but the art in your life. Join me as we explore that perfect blue at twilight, the wild frontiers of art making, and the extraordinary joy of finding your way as you go. Philip, listen, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to talk to you. Yeah.
I love looking behind you. Is that your studio? These large paintings? It just looks like a gallery almost.
Yeah. Well, it's because I've just come back to work here after 6 months on the West Coast, so it's very clean. This is an old mill building in Catskill, New York, that they did a wonderful job of turning it into artist studios. So there's maybe 20 studios here of various sizes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's beautifully done. I feel very fortunate to have this space.
Yeah. And I know you've moved around a lot, and maybe when I look at the trajectory of your work and over the last 20 years, I mean, it's been figurative. It's much more than that. There's a lot more, it just seems almost too simplified to call it figurative, but tell us a little bit about what you've been involved in making and how you think of it. You probably don't think of it even as figurative work, but.
Well, I started really, as many painters do, with the landscape and really plein air painting years ago. And I thought watercolor would be, I found myself painting in watercolor. Then I quickly realized that it was such a difficult medium, but I feel like it was a good teacher because it made me super aware of light, number one, because it's all about, I consider it a little bit like sculpture because you're taking away light. The hardest thing in watercolor is the paper, right? So you're just carving the light away.
Yes.
So just realized how much I really needed to train myself to see, as many, many artists do. And watercolor was kind of my medium, but it was almost all landscape and plein air painting. And then in the 90s, I was living in Sonoma County in California. And actually, I was working also as a builder, as a carpenter. And I told my wife that I thought maybe I would get my contractor's license. And she said, well, that's kind of an investment, isn't it? And I said, yeah, a few $100, I don't know, a course or something. And she said, well, is that really what you want to invest in? I'm so grateful that she reflected that back. And I said, no, I don't. That's not what I want to do. And so I went back to school in my 30s, went to Sonoma State.
Oh, wow. So you studied, who'd you study with there?
Mark Perlman, do you know Mark?
Yes, yes. Okay.
And Bob Nugent was there, and yeah, some really nice people. It was late, I was in my mid 30s going back to school, so I was a little older than the other students, but it was great. And then I decided, well, as we all know, all of us that work in the arts, it's not the most secure profession. So I thought, okay, well, maybe teaching, but you really need an MFA. So I got into what was then CCAC in Oakland,
Yeah, yeah.
now CCA, and had a great and sort of difficult but very important couple years studying. And probably my best teacher there, and someone I admire so much, is Christopher Brown.
Yeah, I was going to say, yes, yes.
Yeah, so that's kind of my trajectory. And that's the reason, I found my way there explaining about my schooling is that pretty quickly, anyone who's gone to any advanced schooling in the arts, or especially painting, watercolor is just not considered, or wasn't when I was there, a serious medium.
Really?
It's so interesting. Yeah, it's just not. I mean, I have various theories. I mean, it's not as durable as a medium. It doesn't last. There are reasons.
Well, and I mean, I'm just looking at those. I guess they're oil paintings, right? You work in oil now. Yeah. When you look at those oil paintings behind you, I mean, there's just, if you're talking about light and vibrancy, a watercolor that big, it just has too much of the paper in it to really kind of take you into the world. I mean, I love watercolor, but it feels more intimate to me, when you go up and you just look in a watercolor, I'm thinking of like Sargent's watercolors, they're amazing, but to see them compared to like an oil painting, that depth and richness. Yeah.
Well, right. It's like, if we say that watercolor is a reductive medium, like carving, sculpting, then with oil, of course, you can do both. You can take away, you can add. So you just have doubled your potential move, right? And I think that's what it offers. So in order to study, really, all the teachers that I had just really encouraged me to work in oils. So then I started working in oils, and I do realize that there's more potential there, as you suggest. I think watercolor is a very strict teacher, and probably in some ways more difficult. So the other thing about watercolor that I find wonderful is, as anyone that's tried it knows, nothing is hidden. So you can't really make a quote mistake.
Yes.
Every mark is visible. And that also is just a great way of kind of addressing that issue of, what is a mistake? And, what do we do with that? Because we're all going to make what we might call mistakes. So, so that's the other part of it. Aside from light, is that kind of, when in watercolor, you have to commit.
Yeah. So you were saying that when you were going through the grad program, and and Christopher Brown was teacher there, and you were saying it was challenging. I'm curious. I looked at doing a advanced degree there as well, and then decided not to. So I was like you, peering in.
Sure.
And so what was hard for you? Was it the kind of work you were making just wasn't in vogue, or like what was hard? I'm curious.
Good question. I think what was hard probably mostly was that I was older. I was probably, let me think for a second, 94. So actually, I was in my early 30s, but I was still 5 to 10 years older than most of the students. And I think at that time, I don't know how it is now, the prevailing teaching mode, which the professors were glad to admit, was they wanted to kind of break people down and then build them back up, which seems a little pretentious to me. But at that age, it was like, no, I don't really want to be broken down and built back up. Right.
Right. I was doing carpentry, 2 years ago. I've suffered enough,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was challenging, but I think there were some good things that came of it, because I had to, maybe the most important lesson of all, I had to kind of decide why I was doing it. You had to defend yourself. And people really challenged me because all painters come in and say, I just love to paint. Well, that's not really enough. I mean, for the discussion, it's like, well, thank you for sharing that, but you've got to give us
right. What are you actually doing? Or have you thought about it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So what did you say?
Well,
or what evolved actually. Yeah.
The question of why, which I think any of us that work long term on any discipline, at some point we're confronted with that question. Well, what do we want? What are we after? Otherwise, you just run out of steam. And what I realized by thinking about what fed me when I looked at other paintings through history, was it, the ones that you just feel, I don't know, the feelings are almost indescribable when you're really moved by a painting. Standing in front of Rothko's in London, in the Tate there's something you're just moved. And so that pretty quickly I realized, well, what I want my paintings to do is to make me feel. I want to feel something. I want to have an emotional response.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why I was drawn to Chris Brown's work, because I think he does a beautiful job of, when I say emotional response, it's not the kind of thing where it's spelled out, obviously. Maybe you couldn't even define the emotion, but I felt moved as I did other paintings through history. So that's kind of the baseline. Okay, so I want to feel something deeply when I look at my own painting. Now, I don't know what other people are going to feel, but I need to feel something. And that gives me something to measure it against.
Yes.
In front of it. Well, sometimes it looks good, but I'm not feeling anything.
No. And it's, I think that's for myself. I got really good at making things look good.
Yeah.
Like you can spend a lot of time doing that. And,
exactly.
So that's a beautiful way to say that. But I love how you're kind of starting with the feeling.
Yeah.
Right. Like where you want to end up. But even that seems to me that they would, in that kind of environment, in that educational world would want to, but what,
Right. And it very quickly gets very heady.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand in some respects why. I mean, you're with a group of people, you have to talk about it. So it gets very heady. And I had colleagues who basically weren't painting at all. They were just talking about it.
Yes. Yeah.
But
right.
It's a culture that in some ways encourages that, depending on who your teachers were. Chris Brown actually was teaching at Berkeley then, but they had a really neat program at CCA where you could study with anyone if they agreed to teach you. Find anyone in the world.
That's right. So he was in Berkeley. He wasn't in CCA. Yes.
But then he went there later. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was a great teacher.
Yeah. So I'm curious, did he, in terms of, his different phases of his work, and I've watched his work for a long time, but, probably you were there when he was doing the kind of blurred figurative work and atmospheres. And what was he describing? Did he ever talk about what he was after with his work? And was that helpful?
No, that's what's interesting. And I can actually date it with his work very specifically. Do you remember he did a show about the Civil War photographs?
Yes.
That was the show that I saw, and I was like, man, I'm not used to seeing contemporary work that moves me like this. Like, he's not afraid of making something that we could say might be beautiful.
Mm-hmm. He pulls it off. It's not primary to the work. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Which I love. I think my work still suffers from being beautiful. Like I love it. But he's able to pull it off, and it's got some gravitas to it,
That's exactly right. And that's what drew me to him. And he really didn't talk about that so much. But the big lesson that I got from him, which really I think it's something that could fuel a discipline, almost any discipline. And that is, and I remember when he said this to me, there was a end of semester critique. I remember it was a tough one where faculty would come into your little space and just,
Oh,
some of them you hadn't seen all semester, right? And they're just looking at it. And it was pretty rough. And I don't think my work was very good, so I don't really blame them in some ways. But he hung around afterwards and he said, what this is really about is about commitment. And it's a commitment to each brushstroke you make, yes, but it's also a commitment to the relationship with the painting. And if you want to be a painter and if you want to be successfully involved in painting, you really have to commit. And it sounds kind of simple, but it really helped me because, it wasn't even about the choices that I made or anyone.
yeah. Yeah. He's not talking about the subject matter of that painting or this one's better. He's just looking for your fire, like, where is it, man?
Exactly.
Powerful.
You hang in there, can you hang in there? And
yeah.
And he also said something was useful. He said, my work, Chris Brown's work, is to be doing something in the studio that makes me want to go there, and work with it. And so the studio becomes almost more like a laboratory or something, right? Where you're excited about it. Because I don't know if you experienced this, Nicholas, but for me, there's a lot of fear in painting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And fear is, I don't know, failure. I don't know. I can't really identify it always, but it can take over. And then I don't want to go to the studio,
Yeah.
You're just confronting your fears. So that was helpful also. It was like, oh, okay, I got to do things in there that make me want to come back and work with them, experiment.
Yeah. Have it be like a laboratory of fun stuff,
Exactly.
And that's that idea of playing. And I used to spend a lot of time worrying and thinking about the work when I wasn't in the studio. And I think it was about 5 years ago. I mean, I just decided to stop thinking about it altogether.
Right on.
And only think about it when I'm making, because I discovered that when I'm making the thing, it's not scary at all. It's sort of interesting,
Yeah,
but the thought of when you're not doing it, the thought of not doing it really sucks.
That is so funny that you said it, because that's one of the things that I jotted down when I was trying to think of what do I think about when I'm imagining talking with you. And that was exactly it, is that I realized at some point it doesn't help to think about your paintings when you're not in front of them, working on them.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of felt like, well, maybe I'm shallow or something, but the thinking about it, worrying about it thing is not at all art making. I mean, it's another thing. It's the same thing with, trying to sell your work. It's another hat. It's another thing, but it's not at all about, it's not related. I mean, you're selling the thing you made but that's about where it ends,
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you about that. Yeah.
Well, I think a little bit of that fear and nervousness that it's like having humility, that we don't really entirely know what we're doing. This thing could fall apart at any minute. I mean, that makes amazing work. I mean, I really think some of my best work, it was work where I was out on the skinny branches a little bit,
Absolutely. That great Tom Waits line about you must risk something that matters, that?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't remember that, but I love it.
Yeah. I always think about it because, right. I mean, you can paint over something that you don't like anyway. That's not hard. But how about painting over something you do like, or manipulating the wet paint after you already like it?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Right. How about being bold and in the last 2 hours of your painting and you're finishing it?
Right.
That's where, I love this. And I use this a lot in teaching that, we don't want to be doing perfect swan dives off the low board, because that's, it feels so good for a while, but it's totally boring for everybody else,
Yeah, right. Unless you can't see how high you are, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, we all need to do a few perfect ones just to get ourselves back in the, to feel like we're there.
What you, I think, are alluding to, this kind of issue of skill and how skill can get in our ways. Like you said before, sometimes you your paintings are in a way, they're too beautiful. And I know, or they can be at some stage.
Yeah.
And I know that. I think that's when I realized that at some point, no matter what you're doing, or just for me personally, I get bored really quickly. So I need to be discovering something new, which usually comes from making what some might think was a mistake or doing something unintentionally. And then you have to kind of deal with it. That's where the interesting stuff happens, doing something I haven't done before.
It's like a balance between the expertise that we develop year after year. We just get better and better and better.
Yeah.
And then what's emerging, and not letting those two things cancel each other out, And it brings me into your actual work, because, when you have a thing that we can see and understand, and, a figure, and then part of the figure is blurred and it's not there.
Yeah.
Even how your work is made has that like lost and found quality. Can you talk about a little bit about edges and how this is?
Yeah.
I think it relates to this expertise in emergent idea, but I'm not sure.
It totally does. No, you're right on. In fact, when you invited me to talk with you, have a discussion, you said something about composition and whatever. I don't remember your exact words, but I felt so seen, because let me step back a little bit and say, when I was in undergraduate school, I don't remember how I sort of developed this, but I started thinking of a way of looking at work and being able to, in a way, it was kind of breaking work down, not just mine, but any work that I looked at. And that is to say that you could imagine that any artwork operates on 3 levels.
Wow, I love this. I'm so excited. Okay.
So it operates first on formal level, which would be the eye. So forget subject, forget content. Its primary impact that happens right away before we have a chance to think about it is just basically how it enters our eyes. What is the composition? Because that's the way of describing painting at its most basic level. What are the shapes? What are the values?
Like I describe it like the patterns of light and dark, whether it's a ice skater or whether it's a Campbell soup can.
Exactly.
It's just first and foremost contrast and pattern.
Yeah. Even if it's a color field painting, and the form of that. Yeah.
Right.
So that's number one. And then the next kind of realm that painting or any artwork can operate on would be more through thought or ideas. So it kind of goes from the eye to the mind. And then the heart is the third aspect. So in a more spiritual way, which is a little bit harder to talk about, but certainly it's distinguished from both of the others. This is kind of in a way, it flattens things out. But it was useful for me because what I realized pretty quickly is that the paintings that we really think are masterpieces work on all 3 levels.
Yes.
All 3 things support each other. And there are lots of paintings in the world, as you alluded to, that, for instance, work really beautifully to the eye. They just work. They look beautiful. But they have no heart connection, or I might not feel it, and they may not stimulate any thoughts. So that's kind of what led me to work with the figure, because I felt like if I want to feel deeply when I look at my paintings, using the figure as a subject is kind of a very direct way, since we are figures, of kind of getting right to us.
Yeah, to the heart and the ideas and all of it. Yeah.
Being a figure. What is that
Hmm.
like? What's my experience? That helped me in my own work because, as you said, it actually happens a lot. I can make something that looks good. That's not that hard. But if it doesn't stimulate those other areas, then I'm like, well, I got to keep going here. That's not enough.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Wow, I've never actually heard of anyone organize it that way. I love that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So it's been figures, and tell us a little bit about your process. Because are you drawing from life? Are you photographing out there in the world? How do you end up with the picture?
Yeah, good question. I've done a lot of figure drawing. I actually taught figure drawing at Santa Rosa Junior College for many years and loved it. But in the studio, I'm working from photos.
Mm.
And the more I do that, what I realize is I'm painting photos rather than just painting figures. It's like, because I often project images to paint. I literally project them with an overhead projector
Onto the canvas?
on canvas.
Wow, how interesting.
So I'm doing that pretty quickly made me realize how beautiful the actual artifact of the photo is. Like the idea that light bounced off this form, maybe it's a figure, onto this surface. Whenever it was, I'm very drawn to old photographs. I don't know why exactly, but when I think of it, I like it. So, 150 years ago, the light bounced off this onto this plate and it was developed and then on, and it got put in a book. And now I'm looking at it. It's like an echo of that light.
Yeah, uh-huh.
And then I'm literally using it because I'm projecting through a transparency. So I'm kind of handling this thing that's really just light that's come all the way from hundreds of years ago.
Wow.
That's exciting. It also brings me back to just the beauty of light and how the materials reflect, not in the literal sense, but also, yes, in the literal sense, but also in the figurative sense, how a transparency projected on a surface can have a beauty in and of itself, regardless of what it is.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like it's just the quality of the light shining through this transparency and picking up pigment that was used to develop it. So, yeah, so I use a lot of photos and I find them often, I do take a lot of photos, but I also find them just online. Like I just kind of look at images
Wow.
online and then I'll find something that'll just grab me and I'll start working with it.
I love that there's this kind of I don't know, serendipity to your process where like there's this thing called soul collage. Have you ever heard of this? It's really kind of cool. You do a workshop and you go in and the person who's running it has cut out gajillions of magazine pictures, like everything from a strawberry to a wolf pack to a kid crying, and just imagine a gazillion photos and you produce these cards and they're basically like almost like your tarot cards, but you just sort of select what speaks to you out of all this stuff. And then you kind of glue it into these cards. And then there's this whole process where another person reads the card that you've created, what they see in it. And it's very illuminating for yourself. It's like you don't even know why you've chosen things. And so I just love that whatever has happened, like you're going to see things for whatever reason, and then you're going to select them, and then you're going to choose them. And
yes,
I'm curious, does it like later, probably there's a complete logical, rational reason why all those things, like they all start hanging together? I mean, these aren't random. I mean, I know they come in randomly, but can you speak to like what's going on with that? Like, yeah. I'm sure that because your work is so cohesive, but I can't believe you're just finding things.
No, that's right on because, well, it's intuition, but that intuition is coming from somewhere. It's coming from who I am.
Yes.
Yeah, you say it well. You're right. And that there's a Zen saying, notice what you notice. You familiar?
Yes.
So I try to remember that a lot, right? Because it's just most of the time it's not it's not lit up with big letters that this is interesting to me. It's just something will catch my attention and something else will. And you're right, it adds up to something. Hopefully it adds up in a body of work, but then certainly in a lifetime of work. Yeah.
Yeah. And so let's say you have is your work on canvas or panel, or what is it on?
I've done a lot of different things. Now I'm painting on panel because let me show you something.
Yeah. It's so cool, you guys. His studio, I'm just looking at 4 paintings. They're beautiful, and it looks like a gallery. Oh, my God. Oh, okay. So what's that? Oh, it's a squeegee.
It's a giant squeegee.
Okay, so you guys, we'll try and get a photo of this. Philip's just shown us that's got to be 7 feet tall, that squeegee.
It's a 6-footer.
Whoa.
The point is my process, and this gets back to something you mentioned earlier. We were talking a little bit about it, is sort of cutting through the preciousness.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the concept of letting go becomes so central in my process because we touched on it earlier. You do something, or I do something, and I really like it, and I don't want to lose it.
Yeah.
That just adds up over the course of a painting, and Faulkner said, "Kill your darlings." It's
right. You start painting around all these. The painting becomes all about you try to preserve parts of the painting.
Exactly, which could be interesting, but ultimately doesn't feel like it's coming from a good source. So a tool like a big squeegee, for me, it's such a blunt instrument. I don't have a lot of control with it. So it is, in one way, it helps me when I can't let go.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Where does one get the rubber part? Or is it like, what is that? How did you find that?
From silk screen equipment.
Oh, so you can get giant squeegees.
Yeah.
I was painting last night, and I use a trowel a lot for the very reason I have these kind of groovy trowels, and I got a small one, and the big one's like 11 inches. And then I've got a sheetrock kind of tool that is for squeegeeing on mud, but it's only, I don't know, 18 inches wide, or not even, probably 13 inches. And I definitely feel painting at scale, like I use giant sheets of paper to kind of like move the paint. And it works because it's this giant thing. Like when the whole painting's being worked on at once, like if you can have the thinking that when you're making a mark in the corner, that you're also aware of the top of the painting, all of it, you're thinking in that bigger way, then the marks sort of hang together. Or if you're not thinking that way, you can manipulate the paint, like with your squeegee, and everything's being affected. And then it takes on this sort of like, I'm a giant object. I don't know if I'm articulating it right, but
beautifully.
I was just thinking about this last night. Like, I got to get some better tools. This is crazy. I'm doing something on the bottom and I'm not even looking at the top. And
well, that could have its own beauty, but I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
And you can tell other artists have wrestled with this. I mean, Richter, you look at his big pictorial things, right, where they're all blurred. I mean, I know he also uses a squeegee on his abstract work, but even on his representational stuff, it does unify. It does also, as soon as you leave, maybe it's a little bit, that phrase, the uncanny valley that they use about digital CGI, computer-generated graphics and stuff, that if it's too close to reality, it doesn't work. It's confusing and kind of disturbing.
Yes.
This is the thing about photorealism, sometimes it's too real, or at least for me.
No, absolutely. Yes.
So then altering it in a way like that. And I like what you say about the whole surface becomes then unified, because that's often an issue.
Yeah, it kind of shortcuts you a little bit. I teach a lot on, a lot of people and, small 12-inch paintings. And I mean, if you take a brick and rub it around on a painting that you've finished, it's just going to look better, because it's all of a sudden everything is being treated the same. And so when the viewer sees it, it's like, boom, it all has the same kind of impact. I don't know. It's fascinating.
It is.
Wow, that's amazing that you've used those giant squeegees. That's so cool.
And so the other thing, Nicholas, just since we're on kind of technique, and I developed this technique where I use window screen. So it's from the hardware store, right? So just a piece of fiberglass window screen. Well, I'll tell you how this started. I love the texture of linen or canvas. I love that. It's a very satisfying texture. But if you put a certain amount of paint on, it's gone. It's buried in paint.
Right.
So to get back some of that weave texture, so I started using the screen. I paint through it.
And then lift it off.
Yeah, lift it off. And then it would immediately give that texture. But what I didn't anticipate, which has led to the way that I paint now, is there's enough paint on that screen that you can transfer it to a different surface, clinging to the window screen. So, you can take 4 hours to paint a face, and then I usually squeegee it, and that just kind of softens it a little. It doesn't really change it much.
Are you squeegeeing it through the screen?
I do.
So you like have a wet face and you'll put a screen on it. Oh, so then it kind of holds it.
It does.
Oh, that's cool. Yes.
It softens the image a little. But then when you take that screen off, you have enough paint on it to take it somewhere else and squeegee it. And it becomes a way of printmaking, basically.
Yes.
And it has all sorts of other interesting effects. For instance, one that I'm loving right now. Imagine a surface. Okay, just imagine this. You paint a face. You paint through the screen. You paint a face. You squeegee it. You take the screen away. It dries. And then you paint a face. Maybe you paint the exact same face again, but your colors and your values are a little different. But it's the same face. So they're relatively the same, but
are they in a different spot in the work, or
no? They could be right on top of the face you painted before.
Okay.
So then you take the screen away and you squeegee the wet paint, and what happens is the little dimples in the surface left by the screen, it forces the paint into those dimples and scrapes it off the bumps. And so you begin to have these transparent layers. Can you picture this? Am I doing it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
You could do it many times, and it begins to build up because you're working with the same lighting. You got the same reference, but it just builds it up into these many layers of transparent paint. Or it looks transparent. It's not. It's oil paint. It's not transparent, but it's being made to look transparent by the screen.
Wow. Is the screen like just a roll of window screen, or do you buy it in a frame and just kind of use it like?
I frame it. I'll show you. Hang on.
Wow, this is so great. It's interesting, you guys. Sometimes we don't get into like the techniques or whatever, but this stuff Philip's sharing is pretty amazing.
You're right.
Oh yeah. Okay.
The danger of getting into the techniques. It's
so fun. I mean, I'm thinking of oil pastels. Actually, when you're talking about this, I'm wondering, because I use a lot of these really big, thick oil pastels drawing through that screen. So they're really thick,
and soft.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. So I just put it on a screen and then I hang it in front of the painting and paint through it. And that's why you can see actually two of those paintings behind me are basically the same.
Oh, yes. Right.
The same composition. And so I could just keep moving the paint back and forth using the screen.
So when you say you paint a face through the screen, are you hanging that frame on your canvas somehow?
Yes.
And then just do your normal painting? Okay. Wow.
That's right.
But you're hanging it on the painting. How is it holding on the painting? How does it stay on there?
There's a little push pin up there in the wall. So it's
okay.
The wire just hanging.
Wow. Yeah. It sort of takes your hand out of it in a way, It
does. And that's a very interesting point because, and this is a whole nother subject that we could we could go on forever about. But this
I
whole
know.
thinking about AI and how it's impacting creative work in all media. I've been thinking about it a lot because I've read some interesting articles. Well, what I'm thinking, and I'm sure others have thought the same thing, is that what it can't reproduce really is our physical movement, right? Like you could ask AI to create a Nicholas Wilton painting, but it would never, unless, then I'm sure it's not far off where they'll build a robot that can mimic,
Ah, yes, right,
movement.
right.
But at this point, it would be a print, right? So it wouldn't have that physical movement.
Yes, yes, yes.
So that's what separates, hopefully, work made by actual humans.
Ah, yeah, yeah.
From something that's just it looks like you're painting, but it doesn't have your physical energy in it. It doesn't have
No, it doesn't. It doesn't have that third level,
yeah.
that you speak of, or not yet anyway.
Yeah.
And then you're using oil paint. Is it just straight up oil paint?
That's right. Yeah. And transferring it around. So, and the other way it works for me, you know how we all, and from what you've said, just in our discussion now, I hear you doing the same things. We develop parts of our discipline that just sort of, they help us address our own unique, what we bring to the process. For instance, painting can be quite laborious. Like you can work all day on a film,
Yeah.
right? But with this method, you do that, but then you have the face now that you can put somewhere in 5 seconds, right? So in that way, it's kind of like printmaking, or maybe like collage. It's a little bit like collage.
Yeah. Well, and the beautiful thing about having the thing and then just placing it somewhere is very different than making the thing in the place. There's an immediacy to it and a surprise because you can't totally control it. And it just has that all fresh, like, I mean, it's amazing. You take a potato and you hit it 5 times potato stamping and do that on a t-shirt. And it's pretty damn interesting,
Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
And here's the thing. And if you don't like it, you have your trusty squeegee.
I think you've learned how to have some fun in the studio. I can tell.
Well, I try. Yeah, you're right.
That's awesome.
It's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. There's not a clear map for this stuff,
No, and as soon as there is, you have to tear it up, right? Because now you're just repeating yourself, or I'm repeating myself. Yeah, exactly.
So as we're kind of wrapping this up here, what are you excited about coming up for you and, right now in the work and shows or anything coming for you? Or
thank you. I have in San Francisco, do you know Dolby Chadwick Gallery?
Yes.
So I show there, and I've been planning a show there for years, but I'm not going to go into great detail. Our house in British Columbia is on an island, Galiano Island.
Whoa.
And it's on the water. Really beautiful spot, a little cove. As I mentioned earlier, I've also built houses. And so it's kind of been a long project, but there was a big steep bank and we decided to build a retaining wall. It was a large retaining wall. I'm not going to go into great detail, but suffice it to say, we built it. It took 3 months, big machines, huge rocks, and part of it fell down.
Oh my God.
And so we said, well, oh no, like we'll never sleep through the night again, thinking that another part could fall down. So we tore it all down. And this is a big retaining wall. This is 80 feet long by about 20 feet high.
And it's holding the water and the island from the water, right?
Well, it's not actually, but it was, not to get into too much detail, it was a log dump 75 years ago, long before we bought it. So they had kind of bulldozed the land, and it was just a very steep bank right near our house, facing the sea. So anyway, long story short, we tore it down and then we had to rebuild it. So workers on the island are difficult. So I ended up being the mason, and it's just, I haven't been in the studio. And now I am, because I'm in New York. I don't have to worry about the wall.
It's funny, I suffer from what you have. I know just enough to get me into trouble, like That's hilarious. You became a mason. Wow.
Yeah. Well, I had done some, but this was.
Uh-huh.
I'm older now. I don't need to do that anymore. But
Yeah.
anyway, it took me out of the studio, so I'm excited to be putting my energy now into this and kind of finding my way back. And one thing I'm also excited about is doing more sculpture. I started working in carving wood because there's a lot of wood in British Columbia.
Uh-huh.
And working on relief carvings at a fairly large scale. So I don't have any here, but I'm kind of excited about that. It presents a lot of different issues.
Yes. Are they going to be bronzed at one point or?
I like working with wood in that respect, but it just jumbles everything up. That painting can do things with a flat surface and illusionistic space, but once you start carving it, you've really you have some different problems.
Yes, yeah. It's like watercolor to the 10th degree. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
you're not getting, once you chip it away, you're not, that's it.
So anyway, I'm excited about that because again, like we said earlier, to me, I get bored pretty easily, and I like to do things that I really have no idea how they're going to end up.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Just before we wrap, there's a lot of folks I know, a lot of folks listening who are figuring this out and just trying to put it all together. And I'm just wondering, I mean, you've shared I know you've taught, and whenever I talk to someone who's taught, you've got all this wisdom that you're sharing, but anything that you could just share that, was a real, powerful sort of potent idea that you hold pretty close in your life and in your art that is helpful,
We need to have those to fall back on. I think what I was saying earlier about commitment, I think that at root, whatever you do, whatever your discipline is, it's a relationship, and you need to be fully committed. And that's not always easy. It's not as though I am always fully committed, but I certainly can see it when I'm not.
Yes.
And then you realize it. Oh, I'm not really here right now. I'm trying to finish this painting.
Yes.
It's different than painting, right?
Yes. And there is the artifact of that sort of didn't quite show up, and there's a painting that isn't quite there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's underlying everything. And then curiosity as an antidote to what I describe in my process as fear of letting go, fear of making an ugly painting. The antidote is curiosity for me.
Yeah. And I think of it also in terms of relationally, when you're sharing something to someone that's hard. I just went through an experience like this, and there can be reactivity, but if you can hold that aside and be like, wow, you actually, what's behind this, that someone's perceiving me this way, or why would I be perceived this way? Get curious instead of just taking yourself so seriously and putting everything, that you're so afraid, that you're going to be discovered to be worthless or something, just be curious.
Exactly.
I love that.
Exactly.
Philip, listen, thank you so much. This is just really great. I'm going to go and look up silkscreen squeegees right after this call.
Go for it. Yeah.
I've made some tools, some larger things. I use a large piece of wood to do a similar thing, but I didn't even know that they made that kind of rubber thing that long. That's so cool.
Yeah. And I like how you articulated about unifying the surface. That's a nice way of thinking about it. I never really thought about it that way, but it makes a lot of sense when I think about it. When I use this big squeegee, which isn't often, it is so big that you don't have control. But it always looks better.
Yeah, always looks better. Isn't that amazing? If I just get out of my damn way, it's going to be better.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Absolutely. It was really great talking to you. And I'll look you up if I'm out there for sure.
Oh, absolutely do. And maybe sometime, I don't know, are you having shows at Julie's or?
I might be this year. I don't have anything slated. I just did one last year at this time, but Yeah.
Well, it'd be fun if our paths cross. It would be.
That'd be great. All right. Thanks a lot. We'll talk soon. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks so much for being here, you guys. Again, if you're listening to this on the first Wednesday when the episode comes out, today is the last day to sign up for Art to Life's signature course, the Creative Visionary Program. It's a 12-week creativity transformational process that we take artists through. It's amazing. And today's the last day to enroll, actually at 11:59 p.m. So if you're interested and you want to find out more, go to artlifecvp.com and check it out. And go to artlife.com and click on podcasts and have a look at all this amazing work of Philip's. There's show notes there to some of the things we spoke about. And especially if you found this interesting, that was so cool talking to him. If this was interesting to you and you thought it was great, please share it with a friend. And especially if you could leave a review, that would mean the world to me. You guys, I really appreciate you being here. Thanks so much. And I will see you next week. Okay. Hey, thanks for listening to the Art to Life show. If you enjoyed the podcast, please help me get the word out by sharing it with your friends on Instagram at arttolife_world. The recording of this and all episodes, along with a place to leave comments, see additional photos, and discover a whole new approach to making art, can be found by going to arttolifepodcast.com. And secondly, if you could leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening on today, I would super appreciate it. It makes a big difference. And last but not least, before you go, if you'd like to be on my artist list, every Sunday morning I send out a video blog all about art making. Go to arttolifepodcast.com to sign up. And all these links are in the show notes, of course. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you next week.